Okay, well, hello everybody, and we'll have a few more people that'll join. And see, we got everything ready. We got the live stream. We're good to go. Waiting room. Everybody's on mute. And I'll just put on the last one's on mute. Don't need to be rude because when we open it up to everybody afterwards, we're gonna have tons of time for Q&A. So very exciting, and I appreciate everybody being here. We've got lots and lots of deals going on with our community. I just had some calculation. We've got, I think it's about 67 people under LOI. And we have 49 consulting calls between Monday and next Monday. And these are people that are imminently hopefully going to go on LOI. So that's great. And one thing about 10 days ago, I had the good fortune to do a Zoom call with a individual named Dixon Quasega. And in the next day or two, we'll have that video up. And this is an unbelievable story. He's an individual who immigrated to Canada from Uganda and bought a business within 7 months. And his story is unbelievable. What he went through, talk about turbulent times and triumphs and terror. I mean, what he was up against was just absolutely incredible. So when he had sent me an email and we had constantly communicated during the process, and he completed a transaction and started learning about some of the things that he went through along the way. We set up a call, and so when that's posted, you guys should watch it because it's really, really inspiring. For those individuals, just take a couple housekeeping items. For those who are returning, thank you very much. For any newcomers, we do these webinars every couple of weeks, and they're building block modules. So all the prior webinars are posted on YouTube. So you should really go back and take a look at that. I try whenever possible not to keep referring to past modules during any specific webinar. However, they all lead up to what we're doing today and what we do in the future. So you should go back and watch them. They're usually a couple of hours long. And the format is we have about an hour and 15 minutes of education. We open up to Q&A. And for as long as you guys need, I'm available to answer any questions that you have. And again, this is a community. When I refer to a community, these are individuals who've purchased our material, our course, How to Buy a Good Business at a Great Price, but everybody is welcome. I think usually we have a good amount of people who are new to this and a lot of our own community, but everybody's welcome, and we're certainly happy to have you. Just a little bit about me for all those that are newcomer. I've been in the M&A world for 34 years. I've purchased 14 of my own companies, includes one co-investment, and those are deal sizes that have ranged from $50,000 to over $208 million. And the reason, or the catalyst for these webinars is all, these groups that have started reading about online and forums of business buyers. And having been in this business for many years and helping buyers for decades, there's just a ridiculous amount of misinformation, bad information, misleading information. And it's really, really challenging for anyone who's new to this and doesn't know what they're doing from the get-go to start being exposed to a lot of this misinformation. And we see a lot of it in these groups of business buyers, a lot of them calling themselves searchers, where these are individuals with no experience, no track record, oftentimes with no capital, and they're asking questions and providing guidance to other individuals who have no money, no track record, no experience. And it's really a blind leading the blind scenario. And what happens is you're getting just bad information.
They deliver. You know
and
that,
so,
right?
If Kevin can turn off his mic. And so so this lack of really good information has really become the incentive for me to do these webinars and provide some good educational material. And, I look at this as you want to get your information and advice from somebody who's already at where you want to be. All these other players in the industry or other business buyers that have never completed a transaction or not at any stage of an LOI or what have you, those are not the people that you should be leaning towards as far as getting advice and guidance from, because they're not even anywhere close to where you need to go and where you want to go. And the data that I provide, which will be quoted during the seminar, is based upon, 34 years of doing my own M&A, 20 years specifically working with buyers. We have at last count 46,721 people who bought businesses as a result of our programs. And we do constant surveys and what have you, and get the pulse of people and challenges that they have and things that they're encountering. And so when I provide any data, these are based on hardcore business buyers, people who've got to the finish line, other people who are still, some people who are struggling, other people that have dropped out, business owners, etc. Because it's very important to provide everybody with context. And some of the things that we know in this industry is it's not very favorable, unfortunately. The statistics in our industry are really dismal as it relates to individuals looking to acquire businesses, because over 90% of the people who begin the search to buy a business never complete a transaction. And those numbers are actually going up, unfortunately. And I personally believe it's a result of what I alluded to earlier with all this bad information, misinformation, and the exchange of information between parties, neither one that are capable of dispensing advice. It's just becoming very, very messy, unfortunately. And I call them the 90 percenters. The average person in that group spends 18 months looking for a business and never buys one. Another data point that's very important is understanding that the generic business for sale websites, approximately 75% of those businesses don't sell, and 50% of deals fall apart in due diligence in a lower market. And so my goal is to make sure you become a 10 percenter and a 10 percenter within 6 months. And that's clearly the objective. This is very doable. 82% of our clients who use our material and participate in our consulting and community buy a business within 6 months. And that's the goal. And this, again, is very doable. And I'm the poster boy. I bought 14 companies. I never went to university. When I bought my first business, I couldn't even read a financial statement. I don't come from a fancy background. And so this is just a matter of acquiring good knowledge and putting it to work in a practical and meaningful way. But understanding that nothing that you've ever done has prepared you for this process, but you can do it. There's no question about it. It's a combination of attitude and aptitude and keeping yourself focused and having the right knowledge at your fingertips. So the strategies that you're going to learn and have seen in prior videos are very simple. As I mentioned, my goal is to help you succeed and turn you into 10% in 6 months. My strategies are simple, they're blunt, they're effective, they're proven. I try to break everything down into bite-sized pieces for everybody, so it's really, really manageable. Because buying a business isn't difficult, it's just complicated. And so the whole building block philosophy is what really, really works. I believe in buying rock solid, good businesses that can grow under your ownership. I don't believe in buying distressed businesses, and certainly don't subscribe. And I hope none of you subscribe to these ridiculous and delusional courses for thousands and tens of thousands of dollars that they sell online, talking about buying these businesses that are immensely profitable for no money down, and you can close deals in a matter of days. That's all nonsense. It's all BS. I deal in the real world, very binary, related to the information, just practical, useful advice that you can put to use immediately. For today, what we're going to be talking about are business brokers, and we're going to be talking about assembling your team of advisors, and most specifically, your accountants and attorneys. And then we're going to have a Q&A session, and I'm available. So as long as you guys want to stay on and as many questions you have, I'm happy to stay here for as long as needed and answer all your questions. So let's get going and turn you guys into expert business buyers. Let's see if you could tee up the PowerPoint. We're ready to roll.
I didn't hear, let's get this party started, sir.
Yeah, I usually say, Mike, as they say in Boston, let's get this party started. So as related to business brokers, this is an overview, and understand I do intermediary work at a higher level. It's called investment banking, which we'll touch upon. My deals typically $2.5 to $7.5 million of EBITDA, but I did business brokers for many, many years. So anything disparaging that I may say about business brokers, I'm disparaging my own community. I'm just telling you like it is. There's lots of confusion about business brokers in their role. Business brokers only sell 10% of all businesses. And this is really, really, really important, because you don't want to over-index or spend an inordinate amount of time trying to buy businesses with business brokers if you're not getting results. And so the tendency is to think, for anyone who's never done this before, I'll just speak with a broker and they're going to help me find a business. Well, the reality is, if you limit yourself strictly to that, you're discounting 90% of the businesses that are sold in the United States. Like every other industry that's based on commission, there's some good brokers. There's lots of short stay, awful ones. That's just the fact of this industry. The number one complaint I get from prospective business buyers is related to business brokers. So we're going to talk about some of those challenges and how to overcome them. There's a big difference between business brokers and investment bankers. Investment bankers, where people ask me when I'm an investment banker, what's the difference? Well, it's like a business broker on steroids. It's just we do larger deals. It's called investment banking because oftentimes you're syndicating the lenders, you bring in multiple lenders. There could be more involvement related to entity structure and that type of thing. Business brokers typically work on more Main Street USA businesses. Some trade up and do a little bit larger businesses, but by and large, they're smaller business. Investment bankers are larger ones and a little more complex. Brokers are part of the process. They could be incredibly useful initially to see a wide swath of businesses. And if we talked before, how you want to look at a ton of businesses at the beginning, so you could really narrow down to what type of business is right for you and then focus your search accordingly. And they generally have lots of listings and access to those. So they're very helpful. And certainly at the beginning of the process, and oftentimes you're going to be, you may buy a business from a business broker, but they play a very, very significant role at the beginning. Don't waste your times with brokers when you're in the laboratory stage. If no immediate response, move on. The laboratory stage is what we talked about in the webinar on the right business, where at the beginning, you have to figure out what business is right for you. So you need to pick out 4 categories and visit with 5 sellers in each, not worrying about too much if the business meets your criteria, because you're just in the information stage or laboratory stage, and you're going to have 5 sellers in each. So you have your laboratory of 20 businesses as a sample size. And if you'll remember, our whole theory and formula is 4-4-4-1-1, which is you should be looking over the course of 4 months, 4 categories of businesses. You have to make 4 offers, take you 1 month to negotiate and 1 month for due diligence, and you close your deal in 6 months. And again, that 4-4-4 number is what we see that people who don't complete that 4-44, in other words, 4 offers, 4 categories, 4 months looking, they're typically the ones that become the 90%ers and fall off. As you narrow the focus, brokers will play less of a role. And understand, unless you are paying them, they do not work for you in any way, shape, or form. They represent the seller or they represent the deal. Okay. But brokers want to know 2 things. Number 1, do you have the money? Number 2, can you get to the finish line? That's it. Your goal is to demonstrate you meet their needs. And when any of the question comes up is, when are you looking to acquire a business? Your answer is, I'm ready to buy yesterday. They do not want to spend their time with individuals that are either don't have the money, and we're covering that in detail later on, or can't get to the finish line. If you show them you can get it done, brokers can be a great ally, especially in competitive scenarios when there's maybe multiple prospective buyers looking at a particular deal. So what if you don't have the money? We talked about it in another webinar. You've got to go out tomorrow, and I mean tomorrow, and get pre-qualified for an SBA loan. If you're living in the United States, I know we have a couple of people from overseas today. If you're living in America, even if you don't have any desire to go the route of an SBA loan, go get yourself pre-qualified to at least demonstrate that. And any prospective investors that you're planning on bringing on board, you want to have them provide you with a proof of funds, even in a benign letter that says, I'm willing to finance Bob Jones in the acquisition of a business up to X amount of dollars, assuming it meets our criteria. It's a non-binding letter. But you want to be able to provide that to business brokers, because often with them, the first question they're going to ask is, we need to see your financial statement or proof of funds. Like your discussions with the seller, listen to whatever brokers have to tell you, but you must validate everything. Remember, they are not representing you. They represent the seller or they represent the deal. So listen to everything and validate everything. So let's talk about the business brokers and the good part. The good part is they give you access to available businesses. They've done it before. They know how to get deals to the finish line. They know the documentation that's needed. They know the process and the steps. So they're a good conduit as far as some guidance, as far as sort of steps in the process. And they can act as a buffer between the buyer and the seller. You want to let them deliver the bad news all the time. You want to maintain a terrific relationship with the seller throughout the process, and post-sale, when they're going to be training you. So if there's anything news that's difficult to deliver, let the broker deliver the bad news. Let them act as a buffer. Now, here's the bad news related to business brokers. They don't represent you. Don't look to them to dispense unbiased advice. They are bombarded with inquiries. And when I say bombarded, they are bombarded. That's what this, the advent of business for sale websites has done. And so for them managing all of that information, they have to, almost pick and choose the information, but they get a lot of inquiries. So we'll talk to you in a minute about how you're going to separate yourself from the crowd. Business brokerage is a listing mentality. It's been the same training for the last 50 years. Every business broker is trained with go get listings. More the merrier. They don't do due diligence on a lot of them. They just look at this as they have this tremendous stable of listings, and hopefully some are going to sell. That's just the way this business is built, and that's the way it was done 50 years ago when Tom West no longer was the pioneer in business brokerage, and it's the same way today. The internet has polluted the industry, and what I mean by that is years ago, before the internet, if you were a business broker, you used to put your listings in the Sunday paper in the business opportunity section. And it was very, very expensive. It used to cost upwards of $100 for a 3-line listing. So if you had a bunch of listings, you have to be very discriminative as to which ones you were going to put in there. If not, you could be spending a whole lot of money. And they were very, very, very benign almost in what they could describe. And so they have to show discretion and put their best listings typically in the paper. When the internet came about and you have these business for sale websites, for $49.95, you can upload 50 listings. So the mentality now was, hey, I don't even have to work this listing like I did before, because before I had it in a newspaper, I had to put together a proper deck. I had to speak with sellers, I had to have buyers and tons of meetings and explain the business to them. Now I just take this listing, write up a quick blurb like a classified ad, and throw it online, and hopefully someone will come across it and be interested in buy the business. It's a real spray and pray mentality. And so understand they're putting out all these listings, they have all these buyers, so it just creates this mass confusion, a whole lot of people dancing in circles. Most business brokers have never owned a business, and in my experience, most business brokers, and certainly based on the communication I get from clients, very poor communication. So this is what you're dealing with. It's not like real estate where they co-broker in all the markets. Someone has a listing, another real estate agent brings the buyer, they cooperate, they collaborate, they work together, try to get it to the finish line. There's only 17 states, I believe, in the United States, it's less than 20 certainly, that have co-brokering. And so we're going to discuss how you deal with that, but that's a really ugly part of this, or very difficult part of this. Now we'll get to the fun stuff, which is how it gets really ugly with business brokers. Their goal is to sell you any business, not necessarily the right one. Remember, if they don't sell businesses, they do not eat. As we talked about earlier, there's less than 20 states where there's even any licensing required, which is completely ridiculous. I operate in the state of Florida, and in the state of Florida, believe it or not, you have to hold a real estate license to sell a business. And the thinking was way back when, because Florida was always the scam capital of the world as it related to real estate, buying selling people swamp land. But the idea was if the sale of the business potentially could involve the sale of real property, and thus the reason why to hold a real estate salesperson license. I'm a broker, not a salesperson. I have a broker's license. But when I did my course, just to give you how crazy this is with the licensing, when I did my course for my broker course, the course was 1,020 pages, 2 books combined. And of that, 19 pages were devoted to business brokerage. And excuse me, I'll put my light back on. And believe it or not, the one day when they covered business brokerage, I was actually sick that day for the 3 hours. So, 19 pages out of 1,000. So the licensing has no relationship to the job that's required. Certainly the International Association of Business Brokers does a terrific job with educational materials. So business brokers that hold, a CBA certified business advisor or other designations from those type of organizations are going to be a step apart. But that's really more appropriate if you're selling a business and the broker you want to hire. When it comes to buying a business, they're just a conduit in the deal. They can also be a huge liability. and had one situation today where one of our clients, broker doesn't even want to let him meet with the seller. So they can become a huge liability. We talked about how to deal with this. If you spent any time looking at businesses for sale and speaking with brokers, there's zero standardization. The way one group of business brokers at one brokerage handle the process related to prospective buyers is completely different than a business brokerage right next door, how they handle the process next to business buyers, how they send out NDAs, what information they require in advance, what information they're going to dispense prior to getting an LOI. When you meet the seller, there's absolutely no standardization, which is okay because you just have to learn how to navigate your way through. And that's fine. You can deal with everything accordingly, but don't think that there's a standardization of a process where one broker says to you, "Well, we'll give you the NDA, and then we're sending you a detailed deck, and we'll have a meeting, and we'll meet with the seller." And the next broker says to you, "Well, we'll send you an NDA, and you'll see a one pager on the business, and you can put it in LOI." It's like all over the place, but that's okay because you're going to learn to navigate your way through, regardless of what's in front of you. Depending on the jurisdiction, they may not even be required to disclose material issues. Meaning, in Florida, where we're governed by business brokerage and the Florida Real Estate Commission, there's certain things that you have to disclose if it's material to the deal. If you represent the seller, you have to disclose it to the buyer if it's material to the deal. In other areas, there's no requirement whatsoever to do this. So buyer beware is definitely the rule. I think that phrase was probably invented as it relates to business buyers. So understand that. When we talked about earlier, listen to what they have to say, but validate everything. This is one of the reasons why, because they are not required to disclose material information related to the deal. Okay. Your first contact. Never, ever, 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 ever state that you are a searcher, because you probably aren't. The term searcher, developed by Stanford, was related to funded searchers. That they fund a search, their search is funded for X number of years, and there's financing behind it. That term has become way overused. It's not applicable. Business brokers look at this and searcher. Everybody calls themselves a searcher. You're not a searcher. If you tell a broker you're a searcher, they are either going to just disregard it, or the first thing that's going to come to their mind is, well, confirming that you are funded. And when I say funded, that you're funded during your search and you have your capital lined up. So you are either you're a business buyer, you're an investor, you're an operator, you're those three things, but you're not a searcher. When people ask me what I do for a living, or a broker, an investment banker, when I look at and buying businesses, when they ask me what I do, I said, I'm a business buyer. That's what I do. And so don't get caught up in the searcher, because the connotation related to searcher brings a whole set of criteria that you probably don't have into place. You should meet and not call or email all the brokers in your area if possible. It's critical for ones who have multiple listings and sectors of interest. Get out and meet with them face to face, just as you have to get out and meet with sellers face to face, as we've talked about ad nauseum in other webinars. In-person forges a memory and a relationship with an individual versus emails or calls. And so if it makes sense and it's reasonably convenient, go and meet with them face to face. Just tell them, I just want 15 minutes of your time. Ideally, you should meet with the broker or owner of the business brokerage, because they may have a broker within their office who's more suitable for what you're looking for. Prepare your one pager. And as we mentioned, one pager should just be a brief bio on you, should be 3 bullets, 4 bullets maximum of what you're looking for, no BS. And if you've developed a website related to your search, make sure that it reflects reality. And we say reflects reality, you don't have a link up there that says team and they click on it and your team is one person. That's not a team, that's an individual. When you talk about your mission, just be very straightforward, no jargon. Here's the type of business that I'm looking for. Boom, boom, boom. These are the 3 or 4 attributes that I want a business to have in place. So be yourself. Don't pretend that you're something that you're not. Just be yourself. I'm sure yourself is very, very impressive. So just be yourself in your one pager and your website, but make sure you have it prepared to give to them. You need to line up financing before. And one more thing, you need to line up your financing before. We've talked about this previously, can't overemphasize it. You've got to get your financing into place. Now, that doesn't mean you have the money in the bank. That means your potential investors, you have aligned criteria with what you're looking for in a business. You know that they are there once you find the business and you can present them with the deck and your presentation. You will go and take care of your SBA pre-qualification, because this one bullet point alone in this presentation could make the entire difference for you during the process of businesses that you see, businesses that you don't see, and how far you get along the road with prospective sellers and brokers. You've got to take care of this. And if any of you are confused about how you deal with prospective investors and getting that proof of funds letter, feel free to email me. We talked about it before in a prior webinar if you view them, but I'm happy to go over it with you again. When you meet with the business brokers, you want to try to be as specific as you can about your dislikes so that they don't start sending you businesses that have no interest for you. Just be very clear. I mean, at the beginning, you have to rule a lot out till you get to what makes sense for you. But if one's for sure that you're not interested in, let them know. Okay. Here's your first contact. This is the situation. You find a business online and you want to send in an inquiry. And I got to tell you, some of the inquiries that I've had over the years are just absolutely mind-boggling. and some of the ones that I've gotten the odd random email from someone who says, well, I can't get to first base with a business broker. You won't answer my emails. In your first contact, and you're listing and finding an inquiry online, you only need to tell them three things. Number one, I'm interested in this business. Number two, I have the resources to complete a transaction. And number three, please send me the NDA or other documentation so we could start the conversation and learn more. That's it. Those are your three bullets. Okay. End of story, nothing else. On some of the business for sale websites, they have this option, a little bit more about yourself. And one of the questions sometimes is, what's your time frame for buying? So your time frame for buying is yesterday. You always pick the shortest interval. So if the first choice is, in the next month, 1 to 3 months, 3 to 6, 6 to 12, etc. It's 1 to 3, always the shortest interval, because they want to know that you can get to the finish line, that you have a sense of urgency, and you're not just, you're not just a looker, you're not just dipping your toe in the water. So make sure you put that down as and your mindset also has to be, if I find the right business, I'm ready to buy yesterday. Some of the things that I've had over the year to make some notes, so I apologize for looking down, but I pulled out a couple of old ones where I've had inquiries that said, please send me the tax returns on this business. I mean, I've never had no contact with them. I don't know who this individual is. There's an NDA, and this was one of the requests. Another one was kindly provide the company address and owner's name. And again, this is like first inquiry. I mean, you don't even, a broker, they're not even answering that. I had one here. I'm willing to pay $787,000 for this business. Yes or no? I think it was listed at $1.3 million. Please set up a call with the owner for Tuesday at 1 p.m. Those are the don'ts. Okay. Again, three things. I'm interested in the business. I have the resources to complete a transaction. Send me the necessary documentation so we continue the conversation. Now, if you don't get an inquiry, keep a log of what you've sent it in. I'm a little old school. I like to print out the listing and I mark on top when I email them. You can save these and set up a profile within some of these business for sale websites. But, after 2-3 days, if I don't hear back, you send them another inquiry, second request. You can find out from the inquiry who the broker is. And then online, just go to their website. You can find the direct contact. And then if you have to send a second one, make sure you put second request in capital letters. I've got to be upfront with everybody. Plenty of times, my first request or email to a broker says second request right in the email line, because I know they're bombarded and they're not quick at getting back to you. So just make sure, follow up, and at the beginning, if they don't get back to you in a couple of days, send in another inquiry. And here's why nothing matters. Brokers won't do your work, and you definitely don't want them to. They're part of the process, and that's it. You use them for what they're good. Again, access to listings. They've done it before. They can act as a buffer and deliver bad news to the seller. But it's up to you, the buyer, to generate deal flow. They are not going to keep you in mind. They may put you on your distribution list. The only way that you achieve favorability with them so that when they come across a listing and they think of you for that listing as opposed to blasting it out to the general public is by impressing upon them the things that we talked about earlier, which is you have the money, can you get to the finish line, and you're ready to move quickly. When you convince them and demonstrate those attributes, yes, then they may be thinking of you when a deal comes up. But if you don't accomplish those three things, you're just another fish in the pond. Once you demonstrate you're a serious buyer, they can, of course, be a good resource. And certainly, you want to stay in touch with them. Make it a habit, just phone call or text, or definitely, as we talked about earlier, you want to meet with them at the beginning, but stay in contact. It's up to you. You have to keep in mind for them to keep you in mind. And it's very important that you go back and watch some of the prior webinars, especially one buying the right business and knowing how to find it, because that is a gold standard lesson in creating quality deal flow for you. So please, after this, do yourself a favor over the course of the next day or two. If you haven't already watched them, and if certainly you didn't participate in the prior webinars, watch them, because that's where your deal flow, your quality deal flow is going to come from. Okay, I love this slide. Oh my, the nonsense that you're going to hear. These are some of the typical comments that you'll hear back from the broker, which says, you can't meet the seller, and you need to understand why. The reason is because it's almost certainly because they don't believe you're qualified. So you have to press them. If they say to you, well, I'm not going to let you meet the seller. Well, why? I mean, why is a real good question. Why? And they may say to you, well, you're not qualified, or, what you're thinking about related to price doesn't make sense, or that type of thing. But understand why. But it's nonsense, because you're not going to buy the business dealing with the broker. You have to meet the sellers, but you've got to understand why. You have ones where they say, look, if there's no LOI, we're not giving you the financials. You're only releasing the financials once you have a letter of intent in place. And the reason why they do this, which is insanity, is their agenda is to get offers and proof to the seller that they're doing their job. So your answer to them in this situation is as follows. I can submit an LOI, no problem. But let's be realistic. Chances are very likely that it's going to have to be revised, and potentially revised significantly, if the numbers do not represent exactly what I've been told to date. And so let's get the P&Ls. I'm not asking for tax returns. I need the P&Ls and adjusted statements, and then I'm going to be able to put forth an LOI that we can stick with. And there's no retrading. Retrading is a term that you may hear when someone says there's no retrading. Means if you submit an LOI, they're expecting you not to revise your offer, which is a little crazy because you learn things along the way. But understand, when you get this answer back from a broker that we're not going to give you any detailed financials until you put in an LOI, it's futile. Now, there are situations where you may have to just play their stupid game, and submit an LOI because it's the only way you're going to get it. It's ridiculous. And in those cases, you submit an LOI at full price in terms just to lock up the business. I mean, if they want to play stupid games, you'll play along with them. But that's one that you get. You'll get one here that we don't co-broker, even if they do. And if they're in an area where they co-broker, they are required to do that, generally through their business broker association. We're going to talk about co-brokerage in detail in a minute. Here's one that I love. We already have an offer. You can put in a backup offer. This is the exact duplicate of when you walk into the car dealership and the salesman says to you, when you talk about price, I'm going to go speak to my car manager, to the sales manager or a finance manager, and he or she leaves for 10 minutes, and they just go into like the service area or around the back. They probably have a smoke, and they come back and say, yeah, he's very happy. We're willing to take your offer. This is like sales speak. And so is it possible? Yes. More often than not, it's not. So what happens in this situation, if you're told that, your answer is you go ahead. No, I'm not putting in a backup offer. If for any reason whatsoever the offer doesn't work out, get back to me. Now, even if there is an offer in place, the reason why you don't have a backup offer is because they're going to play one against the other. Yours is already, they already have one in place. They're just going to take this offer, go to the individual who put in the LOI and say, look, we have a competing offer. You need to boost yours up a little bit. Most of the time you lose out for someone else to increase their offer and you don't get the deal. And so what I like to tell people when I've been in this situation or been told this, and it's been a long time since I've been told that because I've been doing this for, for a while. So people know I'm serious about buying businesses. I always tell them that same thing. Oh, you go ahead and work that offer. I was prepared to put in a full price in terms offer, but if for any reason that doesn't fall through, that falls through, let me know. And all of a sudden you start to hear on the other end of the phone, well, wait, maybe we could work something out. We could figure something out. Don't let yourself get played. That's the point of this. You'll get a statement from them with the other nonsense. Seller is looking for all cash. They won't finance. Yeah, sure. The majority of businesses involve a percentage of seller financing. Of course, there are SBA deals, but I know, like in our case, 91% of our clients get seller financing. The vast majority of small business acquisitions include seller financing. And with today's interest rates and the lack of leverage that banks are financing, seller financing is appearing in deals right up to billion-dollar deals. It is just part of the world in which we deal. Seller financing has almost always been in place. It's typically the only way that sellers can get the deal to the finish line. And so when they tell you that they're looking for all cash, it's just like, yeah, whatever. It's just ridiculous. Not going to happen. Chances of them selling their business for all cash unless they take a massive haircut is going to be, is really, really low. And so don't fall for that trick. We're expecting an offer any day, so move fast. Well, if you move as fast as you're capable of moving, make sure you have the right information. Sometimes you have to move a little quicker than you were hoping to move. And so an LOI versus spending a ton of money and putting together a large asset purchase agreement is the way to go. In LOIs, understand that LOIs, most people think they're non-binding. They can be binding. And certainly from a buyer's perspective, there's certain things, parts of those deals that you want to be binding, like the price that you've presented, or like no shot when it's accepted that they can take backup offers. So LOIs can and should be binding from a buyer's perspective in some cases. But sometimes you just have to move quickly, and you'll see some brokers don't want LOIs. They want you to go through their full definitive purchase agreement. And if this is early on, you don't have enough information, you have to avoid doing that, because with that purchase agreement, you're going to have to bring in an attorney to take a look at it. And you don't want to keep spending money on attorneys for deals that may not get past first base, because you'll end up spending a fortune. Let's talk about some of the key things to consider. Read the NDA of every new broker. When you get a non-disclosure agreement from a business broker, you've got to read it. You read a few of them, you're going to become familiar with them. And by and large, they're pretty consistent. There's certain things in there that repeat themselves from one NDA to the other. But one thing you've got to be very careful of, never sign a blanket NDA. A blanket NDA is an NDA from a business broker that says all businesses that we show you are covered by this NDA. And then what happens is, businesses that they haven't actually showed you, that they believe you may be covered by the NDA. And I've seen it time and time again in areas where there's co-brokers. So you dealt with one broker, they sent you an NDA on one business, and you ended up finding a secondary business from another broker signed an NDA. You go to a meeting with the broker, with one broker, the seller has their broker, and lo and behold, it's the same business. I know it sounds crazy, but it happens often. And now you're in a bit of a jam. And so what you need to do in those situations, make sure you never sign blanket NDAs. It's a single NDA for every single particular business. If you do find yourself in that situation, I know it sounds bonkers, but I'm telling you, it happens. It is pretty common. You notify everybody immediately. What about their commission, and why is it important to you? When you get down to the nitty gritty and you and the seller have a gap between the price, and I've done this plenty of times in deals that I broker, I throw in part of my commission to get the deal done. And so understanding where they are, very often the seller will let it slip what their commission is, but understanding that they're paid on commission and why it's important to you, because you may need to leverage that. And if there's a co-brokering situation, especially so if you've been working with someone a little closely, you want to do that as a last resort because business brokers work hard. They're entitled to their commission. Good brokers will want to make sure a deal gets done. So they may offer it if there is that gap potentially, but it's not the top of line strategy by any means, but it's something to just keep in mind. If brokers offer to do the search for you, understand what they are proposing. A lot of business brokerage office will say that they have search functionality, meaning they can conduct a search for you once you do provide them with certain criteria, which is easily stuff that you could do on your own. But if you decide to go down that road, first of all, you want to understand the cost to make sure it's effective. You want to understand their past results. You want to understand their processes, how they go about doing it. And you want to understand what their quasi agenda is, as I call it, because oftentimes they just use that search, your money, your search, for them to generate more deal flow of listings they can get. We talked about direct solicitations in that first webinar, how to create quality deal search. Unless it's something very specific, that lesson and the lesson in the course and the solicitation letters that are in the course, you can do this on your own, usually achieve some pretty terrific results. So follow that. If you decide you don't want to do that and you want to engage a broker for a search, it's something to consider, but make sure you know what you're getting, what results you can achieve, what type of guarantees that they could potentially provide as far as expectations, as far as return is concerned, and never, 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 ever pay for a search or conduct your own direct solicitation broad. You want it to be very narrow. You don't want to be searching 5 different sectors of businesses, commercial landscaping business and pest control business and alarm companies and durable medical equipment manufacturers. That's not the way you conduct a search. You've got to narrow it down to a specific business type because it's the only way for searches to be effective, both from a standpoint of managing any responses and being cost effective. The last thing that I want to mention related to business brokers is, despite the fact that they have poor communication skills, they may not get back to you. Sometimes they're an impediment to deal, all these things. Call them back. If they send you a signed in NDA, you've had a conversation, you've looked at the deck, you may have had a meeting with the seller or not, and you've decided for any reason whatsoever not to pursue the deal, call them back and tell them. It's just professional courtesy. Business brokers get really, really disturbed, find it really unprofessional that you don't call back, which is pretty funny because very often they don't return their calls, but it doesn't ingratiate you with them. So just get into the habit. Probably, everybody in this call is very professional. Just call them back and let them know. It takes 1 second and it just shows a higher level of professionalism. We're going to now talk about in areas where there is co-brokerage, which is, I believe, 17 or 18 states in the United States, and it happens to a certain degree selectively in other countries. But an area where they co-broker deal, meaning the scenario is similar to real estate, where a seller's broker will participate, cooperate, and share commission with a broker that brings the buyer to the table. Now, it can make your search easier if you're living in one of these areas, because you could just find one broker and have them help you with the search or getting information. You keep searching for businesses online, but you could send the listing number to them and they can track down the information from the other broker, because the other broker will be more inclined to provide them with quicker financials than to an individual. Reconfirm with them that the seller pays their fees. And understand, again, seller pays their fees, meaning the seller pays the listing broker who shares the fees with a co-broker. Understand, they're not your advisor. You're not paying them. Understand, whoever pays them, that's where there's an element of loyalty to, depending on the laws, and it goes as high as a fiduciary duty. But there's certainly, there's no there's the elements of loyalty or acting as a fiduciary not in place. They're a conduit. But personally, in these situations, when I look at a business or potential businesses, there's certain market with a co-broker, I prefer to hire a hustler. When I say a hustler, I like someone who's younger, newer in the industry, because I really need them. They're like my virtual assistant. I'm looking for them to track down information and track down deals. So unless I have something very specific in mind from a sector and may want to focus on a sector specific broker, I like someone who's going to hustle and do the work. and someone usually who's new at the trade and gives them some energy and it's a nice thing to do and you can keep them motivated, they'll very often go way above and beyond someone who's, who's a old hat at doing this type of thing. And again, you're leveraging for access for listings, paper flow from the other broker. Industry expertise is helpful in co-brokering, but it's not really critical. And be loyal to a point. So if you do, in the example I gave you, do hire this hustler and they're doing a good job, remain loyal to them. If you find a listing, give it to them and let them track it down. But your loyalty should only go so far. If they're not getting the job done, don't have to spend your time getting frustrated. If they're not getting the job done, just forget about them. Get another broker to track down the deals. Again, this is all applicable in areas where there are co-brokering, and there is a major incentive for them. If you demonstrate to them as well that you're a serious buyer, they're going to make a significant commission as a co-broker on the deal. So you remain loyal to the ones that do the work for you. They're your worker, they're your VA, they're your hustler, they're tracking down stuff on your behalf. That's the way you have to perceive them. In areas where they co-broker deals, you want to interview them. What is your industry or deal size specialty? How many listings do you typically carry? What is the most effective way for you and me to work together? And ask them. And again, I'd like to hire a hustler, but find out from them if there is some industry expertise that meshes with what you're looking for. And if I find a listing, when will you contact the seller's broker? And this is critically important. You find a listing online that's of interest to you, and you're demonstrating loyalty by sending it to them to ask them to contact the other broker with the opportunity for them to earn a commission. You want to know how quickly they work. And the answer to this should be, it's never more than 24 hours. And they should be within 24 hours of being able to call you back and tell you what happened. If you find yourself calling them 2-3 times, asking them a particular listing or whether or not they contacted the other side, just drop them and move on and find someone else. And brokers talk. So you don't want to get on their bad list. And I've had this scenario not pretty recently where we had, it was actually a deal that I was representing. I told many of you before that I do some investment banking and usually handle 3 to 4, 5 deals maximum in a year. And some pretty rigid criteria, but it keeps me in the game. And I love that part of the M&A world. And this was an individual who contacted us. We signed the NDA, proof of funds, asked to have a call with the seller, qualified financially, and we got onto the call and they started going through the questions, like the most specific ones that were in the deck. They were in the sim, very clearly marked out. And it asked them, say, the sim at one point was, that we talked about that in the sim. And at one point I asked him, did you read the sim? And he said no. And then he gets carried on with his questions. And after about 15 minutes, he said, well, you know what, I'm not interested. This business is not for me because of this, and this, and related to the answer. And it was really offensive because you go through this work to provide a sim. Of course, you want to have them set up a meeting with the seller, but they spent no time looking at it. Their questions were ridiculous. They could have easily been answered. They were very abrasive in the way they ended the phone call. It was like, I tell my client, we've met mostly really nice people, and this is just one bad apple. And nothing more than that. And I was speaking to a colleague of mine who also does lower to mid-market transactions, and was mentioning something to him about this scenario without mentioning names. And he said to me, hey, was the guy's name so-and-so? And I said, yes. How did you know? He said, did the exact same thing to me. And we both sort of looked at each other and said, never going to send him the deal again. And brokers talk all the time. We have some of these offices where they have 5, 10, 20, 50 brokers in the office. If you don't conduct yourself in a proper way with these brokers, they all talk to each other. You just get sort of put on the bad list and that's it. They take you off the distribution list. So the things, they may have their faults, they certainly do. You conduct yourself in a really professional manner and demonstrate that you're serious. It goes a long, long, long way, especially because the amount of people that they deal with and the competition that you're in with other buyers isn't that difficult, because most people don't have the level of education that you're getting from this, webinars, etc. But just conduct yourself professionally. So now, as far as you have to do some homework if you haven't already done it, and this you should do quickly. Go online and list all the brokers in your area, the number of listings and categories. You could read it down, and meet with those who have prominence in categories that are of interest to you, and work your way down the list. this is your part of your resource library that you want to maintain that we talk about, which is very important. So make those calls, make those introductions, get going with business brokers. We understand very clearly that they're just playing a small role, but especially at the beginning for you to look at businesses for sale, they do play an important role. So, work that area of the business quickly, because, there are times you may find one that makes sense for you, other times not. But, work the area of brokers, get yourself introduced, get on their distribution list, make your impression with them so that when they come up with a listing, they'll think about you first, and, and get going related to those meetings. And as we talked about earlier, get your financing in place, as we talked about, even if it's SBA pre-qualification or a benign letter from individuals that you talked about related to potentially financing you. We're going to talk briefly about investment bankers so you understand the difference. Investment bankers, we talked about earlier, deal size typically is the delineating factor, plus they do a lot more work related to the deal structure, financing, syndication, etc. But they're a world apart from business brokers. It's like looking at a Ferrari versus a unicycle. If you can get referrals from lenders or accountants or attorney or online of investment bankers, and the reason why, irrespective of whether a business you're looking to acquire is in their sphere of deal size, you want to meet with them. And here's why. You should call them all and find out their deal sizes. And if your deal size meets their criteria, then of course, definitely meet with them in person and get your bio to them and maintain contact. And the reason being is as follows. They get deals daily. Every single day, they get inquiries. And so oftentimes they may be interviewed for something, they don't get it, or the deal's too small and they just say, forget about it. Their crumbs may be your jackpot. Something could come across your desk, their desk, that may be right for you. They're not going to take it on, but they'll refer it to you. And so meeting with them just is part of the networking and getting the word out. You may be stunned to end up with a deal that comes to you from some of the craziest places. And we talked about how you create deal flow, and this is one of the better ways to do it, because they get access to deals all the time. A lot of them don't meet their criteria. And so when we talk about that their crumbs may be your jackpot, it truly can be the case. So now, as far as using business brokers' professional references, they might tell you, here's the attorney that we recommend, or the accountant we recommend, the lender, etc. Be very leery, especially when it comes to attorneys and accountants. I don't like business brokers to be very chummy with or buddy with the attorneys and accountants. I want my own independent individuals to look at the deal. So there are times where geographically you get restricted, but be very, very leery about it. And it's typically a last resort. It's not your first choice. It may be worth contacting them, interviewing them, but really it's not your first choice. And as far as lenders are concerned, if they recommend particular lenders, for the most part, they're getting a commission. That's the first thing. They may have a pre-qualification, but never accept the fact that they tell you, you can only use my lender. That's nonsense. Absolutely not, because you don't know, they may be getting a bigger commission than what typical lenders do. And not all lenders pay commission by any means, but you don't want to get yourself painted into the corners by the broker says you can only use my lender, because especially when it relates to SBA, the SBA lenders, they have this range of between 2 to 2.75% above and beyond prime at which they lend. Well, this lender may be at 2.75, and you may be able to find something at 2.25. So don't ever fall into that trap. You can only use my lender. Where it's good to say, okay, well, if you have a lender, send me the pre-qualification letter or for the business, because then it gives you an idea at which level the lender is willing to underwrite the deal. But don't get yourself painted into a corner. And again, as we mentioned, always get a pre-qualification letter if they have it, because if they say it's been pre-qualified, they'll have a copy of the letter that breaks down the deal. Okay, so let's move on to your professional team and your accountants and attorneys. I'm going to give you a good overview, and then we're going to dig in. I want to make sure I'm not checking any text. I want to make sure we're good for time. So let's talk about accountants and attorneys in an overview. Not all attorneys and accountants are created equal. Don't even think about doing a deal without them. Even if you're a CPA, hire a third-party accountant to do the financial review. Okay, I had, one story that comes to mind. This was husband and wife, wonderful, wonderful people, and they were insistent that the husband, who had done accounting work at the firm that where he worked before, he was more than capable to do the due diligence. I begged them not to, but they wouldn't have anything of it. And sure enough, it turned into a disaster because, you know what? Yes, they were an accountant. They did due diligence years ago, but they weren't prepared and didn't have the skill set to understand how to look at a business deal and all the checklist items that they need to go through. The other thing is, before you sign anything, LOIs or otherwise, make sure your attorney reviews them. You'll get more comfortable with NDAs, and you'll be able to sign your own once you look at a few of them. But anything of any significance that binds you, make sure your attorney reviews it. If you don't become proficient in legal matters and you defer to your accountant and attorney for everything, it's going to cost you a fortune. Okay, and understand something. When you get the initial numbers from a business and the P&L, if they don't make sense to you, chances are they're not going to make sense to your accountant. So don't keep deferring everything to them, because you can spend a fortune of money on, and this is a lot of things that you can do yourself if you have the proper knowledge and knowledge library. We gave us a little bit of homework related to brokers. Here's your other homework in the course. In our course, make sure you read the NDA, the LOI, and the purchase agreement samples as quickly as possible, even if you're not on that section or lesson yet, because you want to get familiar with them. And if you have any questions related to certain clauses, feel free to email me. I'm happy to jump onto a call and explain them to you. But get familiar with legal agreements. That doesn't mean you're going to bypass any of them for work down the road. However, you want to get comfortable with some of these things so you know what the questions to ask. Keep in mind that accountants will generally quote a project. It's going to be X amount for due diligence. Attorneys will bill you in 6-minute increments. Pay their bills immediately, even if the first one is excessive. Discuss it with them. You may need to move on, but understand how they're going about billing you, because some of these could be billing machines. Should you deal with a big or a small firm? It really depends on the deal size. If the deal has very specialized components of intellectual property or environmental issues, tax issues, a potential stock sale, if there's less than 100% being purchased of the business, you may need a more specialized accountant and certainly an attorney, because the big firms will have resources. But other than that, an attorney who does M&A work, business transactions, is going to be sufficient in most cases. We'll talk about the hiring process in a minute. You also want to find out who the seller's attorney is and accountant is. I mean, you can't imagine how many times the seller is going to tell you, "Oh yeah, I'm using my brother-in-law, a patent attorney." Well, you may have to turn that around with the seller, or get your attorney to make sure that they convince the other attorney, the patent attorney, that they're the wrong person for the deal, because you'll tear your hair out. Okay, and I've gone through it often enough. As you can tell, I've torn a lot of my hair out over the years dealing with these situations. So really and truly understand, if the seller doesn't have the right attorney in place, it could be problematic. And believe it or not, attorneys and accountants can be incredible funding sources. They don't get offers to get involved in deals. And so as you establish your relationship with them, there is no problem whatsoever for asking, "Hey, if I find a business and find it interesting, would you consider investing as well?" Think about them potentially as a funding source. I've done a number of deals where they've gotten involved on the funding side. They could be an incredible resource for you, and certainly be an incredible resource to be able to introduce you to other potential lending facilities. And can you go negotiate your fees to a certain amount, but don't be penny wise and pound foolish. The most important thing is to get the right advisors into place. That is at the top of the pyramid of what the agenda is. And so if you can't afford their fees, you may have to move on to someone else. I get that, but you want to engage the best one possible, and not, petty as far as their fees are concerned, because they'll earn their money. So how to find the right ones? Clearly from referrals, speak to other successful business owners and buyers. If you're located in the state of Florida, call me and I'll tell you, I'll give you a bunch of good introductions. Most attorneys will have an accountant reference and vice versa. So when you meet with them, ask them. There are due diligence specialists. We have a due diligence specialist on the webinar tonight, Marvin Baker. He's on this call. And so his firm focuses entirely on due diligence and business acquisitions. Would be a great resource for you. Maybe Sia, I don't know if we have Marvin's information, but maybe afterwards when we send out the recap and our usual thank you note and what have you to everybody, I'm happy to put Marvin's information in there. But he's an individual that does nothing but this type of work. So if you guys are looking at a deal, I would strongly recommend that you get in touch with him, and he'll give you some really terrific insight, and is likely someone that you're going to want to hire for this process. Network with anyone else who has sold their business. At your networking meetings, find out accountants and attorneys, and again, you want an introduction. Generalists are great, but they're not for you. And you want people that are focused on business transactions. And you definitely don't want to hire a door attorney. And a door attorney is the type of attorney that practices whatever law walks through the door. You don't want a door attorney. You want an attorney that focuses entirely on corporate and transactional law, and specifically on small business transactions. If you're having trouble, it's okay to meet with a big M&A firm, an attorney, because they will likely refer you out. For your initial meetings, as far as questions that you want to ask, meet with them, confirm there's no cost for you to have the introduction, the first meeting. If they want to charge you for the first meeting, don't deal with them. They're just going to be a billing machine. Every good attorney and accountant is happy to have a brief 15 to 30-minute call with you to understand what you're looking for. Don't be intimidated. Look for how well they explain things to you, because you don't just want them to give you an answer. You want to understand it, because the situation may arise again of something that came up. For example, when they tell you that a non-compete can it's the baby in bathwater syndrome, meaning if a non-compete is challenged, the law will revise the non-compete if it's not legal, but they won't throw it out completely. And so when they say to you, well, it's not the baby with the bathwater syndrome, so you don't have to worry about it. Understand what that means, because in the next transaction, when you're potentially talking to a seller and you come across the discussing non-competes, you're able to explain it and negotiate in a way that's backed up with some education and knowledge. So here's a bunch of questions that we have, and for sake of time, I'm going to run through them quickly. And when you look at the webinar online, you can mark these down as well. What is your specialty for industry and deal size? Discuss the business with them and whether or not they have experience. Understand their fees and how they were structured, whether it's a flat fee. Some attorneys now are going to flat fees for business transactions, how much retainers they take hourly, and how it's billed, B-I-L-L-E-D, not billed. Sorry if my pronunciation wasn't great. How do they bill you? You want to make sure that you pay the bills immediately when you get them. Get an estimate for the approximate deal size now. And once again, when you have a target in mind and you fully engage them. They understand that they may not be able to give you an exact price, but if they're doing it long enough, they can give you some parameters, barring anything that they have not taken into account that you may not be aware of it yet. Dead deal fees happens all the time. Understand how they deal with them. They've taken a retainer. You've spent $5 or $7 or whatever thousands of dollars. The deal falls apart. Do they give you any break on dead deal fees? Often. They will credit them towards the next deal. That's the way they should do it. Okay. But you don't still, with that in mind, you still don't want to have dead deal fees all the time. That's why you want to move down the road as far as possible on your own with good information and good negotiating skills before you're bringing them in and spending a fortune on their fees. And I'm asking if they have an attorney or CPA referral. If you like the deal, we work on together is another question. Would you be interested in investing, or potential investors we talked about earlier? Is there any time of the year that you're not accessible? Very important, because oftentimes they have seasonality to their business, like consultants at tax time, and they can't do the work. So how much? And so the follow-up question to that is, how much notice do you need to take on a new account? And for attorneys with a simple LOI, what are your estimated costs? and do they do the work, or they bring in juniors, and they should be doing juniors for any type of research at a lower fee. And one thing I always like to tell them, look, I'm new to all of this. What is your main role? How do you interact with the seller? How immersed do you like to be in a deal? That's something you want to tell them because you want to see how involved they are, because understanding what specifically is their role, sometimes they overextend themselves and they could really screw up a deal. So let's talk about accountants first, and then we'll go into attorneys. Every accountant has performed this type of work after college. That's what they do generally after the first type of role at a CPA firm. That's what I see, this type of work, financial review and due diligence, but it really is meaningless because some of them might have done it 20 years ago. Again, you want a specialist, someone who focuses on due diligence. There's a number of them around. We talked about Marvin. It's a great resource for you. But it's someone who just does this as part of their work is not for you. You want someone who's familiar with the deal side, the sector, and is meticulous in asking what if about the information. We had one accountant, the individual did work for me, and before I hired him, I asked him about his process, and he says to me, the first thing he says is, I take them to lunch. I said, what do you mean you take them to lunch? He said, yeah, I take the seller to lunch. I said, and it was like, I got a little taken aback, like, what do you mean you take them to lunch? And it was, before I start to work, I go meet with the seller and I take them to lunch, because it's unbelievable how many times they disclose things to me without even meaning to over lunch related to the business. And I myself make sure I have a good relationship with the seller so we can ask them about things, because it really drops their guard. And again, this accountant is representing you. I thought that was pretty interesting. And so when you speak to potential accountants, understand their process, because certain things like this are really important and demonstrate that they're really on your side. They want to really dig deep into the numbers and make sure the numbers make sense for you. Understand what is their scope of work beyond the review. Do they deal with entity setup or tax advice? Typically they should, but if they're just specialized in due diligence, they may not. So they'll refer you to someone. They should have a due diligence packages that explains exactly what they provide, their checklist, etc. And again, keep their seasonality in mind, because all CPAs go completely nuts at tax time. Then we're going to talk about quality of earnings, which is the number one dumbest thing that buyers do in due diligence, because for the majority of people that are on the call and the due diligence and the deal size that you're working on, you do not need a 60-page quality of earnings package. You need a proper forensic and detailed due diligence on the financials, cash flow, pro forma statements, etc., tracking and analyzing, paper trail, but not a full-blown quality of earnings. Quality of earnings evolved specifically with institutional investors more as a way for them to cover their butt if they had any limited partners or investors who required it sometimes in their prospectus or their as a condition to their investment. And it's really, quality of earnings is like a sim or a deck version of the financial and everything related to them. It's very deep. There's a lot of commentary, but it's not really applicable in a lot of small businesses because there's a lot of filler. It's really done for them to get a whole package and be able to say to their partners after or limited investors, look, we got the quality of earnings report. Yes, we made a mistake, but we had that verified. Financial due diligence with a good due diligence firm will analyze all the things, but not necessarily the commentary. And what I would suggest to do is go online and get a sample of a quality of earnings report so you understand what it is in detail versus in cases, CPA pitches it to you. You again, except that you may have a lender or someone who's financing you in the deal. They may require it, and that's okay. Then you have to get it, but understand what it is, because a lot of it is fluff. There is some good, valuable information. I'm not taking anything away from a good firm who does good Q of E reports, but understand what's involved, because you don't want to go down that road to do a Q of E when it's not necessary. In smaller, simpler businesses, the due diligence accounting will get the job done. The deal side complexity and exposure are what private lenders may dictate if you need one. And understand, you get a quality of earnings report, and it's a lost deal. You spent a whole lot of money. Like the cheapest quality of earnings report I've ever seen is $25,000. Maybe some less, maybe it gets watered down, but that's what I've seen. So you don't want to start spending that kind of money. You can always dig deeper. So when you get the overview and financial review, you can always dig deeper onto your own. Let's talk about accountants and valuations. So the question is, when should you let your accountant do the valuation for you? Unfortunately, I don't have everybody's image on the screen right now, so I will give you the answer. And the answer is never. Okay, let me let that sink in for a second. Your accountant or any accountant does not do your valuation. You need to know how to do valuations. It is critical. Never mind from the standpoint of how much money it'll cost you if they ask them to do valuations in every businesses. But accountants, for the most part, do not know how to value a small business. Not because they're not competent, but because they focus on the balance sheet and the assets of the business. And in a small business transaction, I'm talking up to $5, $8, $10 million. Typically, maybe sometimes even more, you are buying an income or an income stream. So you're working with the P&L. Yes, the balance sheet is important, but often in these deals, the buyer doesn't even take the balance sheet outside of the inventory and maybe some net working capital. However, you do the valuation based on the profit and loss statement and the adjusted earnings, and a multiple is attached to it, and use our Diomo business assessment valuation module, and you're going to come up with a valuation. You do not let your accountants do the valuation. Hopefully it's very clear. I don't see all of you on this picture, so I want to make sure that you got this. They do not do your valuations. Now, they can do some other scenarios for you, discounted cash flow, other types of valuation to give you some parameters, okay, that you could look at, and a guardrail. But the valuation is done on the profit and loss statements and the adjusted earnings with a multiple attached. In attorneys, they are your scribe, and they're there to protect you. That's it. As a scribe, they are there to translate into legalese what you and the seller have agreed to. That's it. Okay. And to mitigate your risk, meaning they are your lower your risk or mitigate your risk advisor. They are not your deal maker. You, not them, make the decisions. The good ones will outline the risks, the pros and cons, and let you decide. You hire the best one you can afford, who practices corporate transaction law exclusively. We talked about a big or a small firm. Try to avoid, if you have an attorney who's got the I'm the smartest person in the room syndrome, you get this often with attorneys. They're just trying to justify their degree. They can kill the deal. And one story that comes to mind, which happened, a number of years ago, I was representing the buyer, the seller, and the buyer. We had a beautiful relationship. There were brokers involved on both sides. But for me, it's always when I've represented a buyer or seller, I want to get the parties talking to each other as quickly as possible. So if I'm representing a seller, I'm happy to have them be meeting with the buyer as quickly as possible, because that's how deals get done. Buyer and seller had agreed to pretty much everything, and there was one meeting just to go over some cosmetic window dressing stuff related to the deal, but that every big point was already agreed to. Sitting in the room, and this one attorney sits there and he says, the earnote is not acceptable. Three things aren't acceptable. The earnote's not acceptable. This is the seller's attorney. The non-compete should be 3 years and 25 miles, not 5 years and 100 miles. We're not taking this deal. And the purchase price is not acceptable. I mean, we all sat there like they were completely undoing this deal. I mean, all these high-level points were agreed to. And it was, as he was talking, and he was a whiny guy, like he talked like this. It was like a real irritating guy to begin with. and I closed my eyes, I picture him perfectly. I'm not going to disclose his name. But even leading up to that, he was like trying to run the meeting like he was a real deal, like he was the deal maker in all of this. And to me, it was always like, he's just, he's trying to justify his how much he's paid for law school, and he was awful. And it really took everybody aback. So I'd gone through this plenty of times. I said, okay, well, we have two choices now. And you could see that the seller was starting to think about this. So we have two choices now. And I said this to the seller right in front of, it was me, the buyer, the seller, and me, the buyer, the seller, their broker, buyer's attorney, and seller's attorney, the whiny guy. I said, well, we have two choices. And tell the seller, number one, you could replace your attorney right now. Or number two, we walk out that door right now, and we never come back. These are material points of the deal that we shook hands on, we agreed to. This guy is not going to ruin the deal. I don't know who you are or what you stand for, but you don't come in marching in here and try to prove how smart you are. These two individuals reached the deal that they're happy with. If there's some part of this that provides terrible exposure for your client, then of course you want to advise them that. But this is the spirit of the deal, and they've already agreed to it. And the seller was like, sat back in his chair. He said, give us a moment. And he asked his attorney to if we could leave, we left. We spoke to the attorney, come back to the meeting. The broker's there, the seller's there, no attorney. That was it. So understand as an example, okay, when you get an attorney, if you ever get a sign that they're trying to undo the deal, just get rid of them. And similarly, on the seller side, if they start to impart their ways and destroy the trust that you've established with the seller, they are the wrong attorneys, and you've got to deal with it immediately because they can undo the deal. It's funny because, like, I think it was 6-8 months ago, I came across this guy in like a restaurant, and he said to me, in mind, like, how come you don't send me any deals? And I said to him, I said, because my clients are smart. That was my answer to him, and just kept walking. So again, the lesson here is make sure you deal with someone who's ascribed, and put down what you and the seller have agreed to. If there's something very important on your side or their side that provides terrible exposure, you could walk through it, but don't let them negotiate your deals. They're all going to tell you the deal makers, not deal breakers. Make sure from references that they prove that. Flashy attorneys make a lot of sense. A lot of them are working now on the smaller firms that are working on X amount for the transaction. So at least you know what you're dealing with. Because if not, you could get into the scenario where you have a billing machine. Okay, let's go down to how to save some money on your fees. Do as much as you can yourself. Get docs from the seller, follow up for missing ones. If there's any filings at the courthouse, you do them yourself. If you're doing paper signing and not digitally, you do the photocopies yourself. It costs, I don't know, 15-20 cents at the FedEx office, and they'll charge you usually $2 or $3 per page at the firms. So you do whatever you can yourself. Again, when you look at the first set of financials, you look at them yourself, make sure if they don't make sense to you, you don't have to give them to your CPA to look at because they won't make sense to them either. Assemble your questions or concerns when you have them, that you have to speak to your accountant attorney and make one phone call or send one email. You don't want to call them for everything, but put everything together so they answer in one fell swoop. Email is much cheaper. And some attorneys, this again, it's not like accountants can typically give you a flat fee. Some attorneys will not charge for emails that are under 10 minutes or something for them to answer. So ask them about it. Be smart about having your attorney speak to their attorney. Only when needed, and get aligned with the seller first whenever possible. So if there's any type of deal, make sure you and the seller are on the right, on the same page. But if it's something that needs to be done at a higher level, oftentimes it helps your relationship even with the seller. Let the attorneys talk to each other. Be meticulously organized and provide them with up-to-date to-do list, which also sends a very clear message because there's a lot of things that you got to get done when you get into an LOI and past that. So keep your to-do list up to date and distribute them to your advisors so that they know you're right on top of things and you're managing the process well. Don't get into the situation where you're just calling them endlessly for no reason whatsoever. You may want to even barter for your services, where if you have a type of business that you're acquiring that has something that they may be interested in and could be as simple as landscaping or auto repair, whatever it may be. It may be a service that they like, or if it's a business service that their firm will like, barter for their services. Hey, if we get this deal done, I'll do all of your X, Y, and Z work for the next year in exchange for you reducing your fees by X amount of dollars. So it's a wonderful way to look at it, and use them when you need them. Don't get into the habit of just calling them for no reason whatsoever. Okay, so there's a couple of things before we get into the Q&A. I want to discuss a few things regarding your approach and making sure that you really have in place a plan to succeed, because we're going to have a full Q&A in a second. So these videos that we do in the webinars, videos you see online, and the articles they write, these are all ways to augment your knowledge base and your knowledge library. They augment what you need to know. You can't spend your time running around the internet looking at 1-minute clips of social media and think that you're going to become an expert. All these things, and it's good to read good information and make sure it's the right information, but they augment what you're doing. And buying a business, I mean, it's not difficult, but it's complicated. And the reason why 90% of the people fail is because nothing you've ever done has prepared you for this process. I mean, that's just the reality. No matter how wonderful your education has been, don't confuse, a terrific education and an MBA at a renowned school with the knowledge that you need to buy a business. there was an old book written by Mark McCormick, who was the head of ING, called What They Don't Teach You in Harvard Business School. This is that same scenario. You haven't learned how to do this. So you want to make sure the difference between your success and failure is going to come down to knowledge, but choose your knowledge wisely. And it's no question in my mind that the 90 percenters and the 10 percenters, the gap between the two of them is knowledge. There's one book that you guys, I don't know, you guys seen this book? Read this book? I see this quite a bit on some of these forums by Build by Walker D. Bill. I'm seeing a lot of nods, so maybe you turn on your camera and raise your hand. So Walker D. Bill, it's a good book because you can never have enough good knowledge. And probably about a month ago, I saw a video online that Walker did where he went to a business owner. I think the guy's name was Chris Minshew. He had a company that refurbished steel. So like stainless steel cylinders or any steel cylinders that became rusted, he put them through a process and they came out shining brand new. It was a great video. It was about 30 minutes long. He visited his business. I thought it was a great video. And I went on to LinkedIn and I sent Walker a note, a message. And I said, hey, I saw I didn't say hey because I said hate saying hey, but I said, Walker, I watched your video. I thought it was terrific. I just wanted to compliment you. I've been in this business for quite a while. And if you want to ever talk or have some more story, that's great. If not, no problem. That's not the point of my message. I just want to compliment you on a terrific video, very educational and informative. And this is the email. This is what I got back from Walker on LinkedIn. Oh my God, Richard Parker, I totally know you, which made me think about the movie Elf when he sees Santa. I don't know if you guys watched that movie, one of my favorites. He said, Santa, I know him. Anyways, that's what I thought about. Richard Parker, I totally know you. I bought your course. It's referenced in Buy Then Build. I think the world of you. That was really, really nice because he's got a good reputation. And I hadn't even realized that he bought my course a number of years ago. And it's actually mentioned in here, and I'm going through it right now. But it's a good book. If you guys haven't bought it, you should read it because you could never get enough good knowledge. And of course, I'd like you to join our community, but I'm never going to give you a sales pitch to buy our program. This is not an infomercial. My life isn't going to change one bit whether or not you buy our material. I don't make my money selling programs and buying businesses. I've made a lot of money buying and selling businesses, and I've been very blessed and very grateful and very appreciative, and it's a good way that I give back. And I feel it's a bit of my obligation to, I'm 62 years old, I'm turning 63. I tell people I'm 62 and a half, I'm turning 63, but I really feel it's an obligation because of all this misinformation that's out there, and I get a real joy from educating business buyers. But it's not going to change my life whether or not you buy our program. I mean, it has the potential to change your life because buying a business is going to change your life. It's either going to be good or it's going to be terrible. You buy a good business, it's going to change your life for good. You buy the wrong business, you're going to have a horrible disaster on your hands. Or if you don't have the right knowledge, you won't buy any business at all if you listen to the data. When I started doing these webinars or planning to do the webinars, I've never done them. So I bought this, it was recommended to me, this guy, Jason Fladling, who has this book called One Too Many, T-O Too Many. And he is the king of webinars, most successful webinar host ever. And he's done webinars with millions and millions of dollars from each webinar. And I said, well, I just want to understand how should I do it? Should it be PowerPoint? How long it should be, etc. But it's all related to selling lots of stuff, and everything is geared towards selling, and that's just not me. And so I didn't really get a whole lot of value in it because that's not who I am. And I have a lot of clients on this call, so you know who I am, and try to be straightforward with everybody. But one of the things they talk about is give everybody 50% off. Don't stuff the prices and give everybody 50% off. I don't operate that way. That's not the way we work. There's a reason why 82% of the people who follow our program and are consulting by businesses is because our program works. And we provide ongoing consulting, this type of community. We do all the time. I answer every email. I've got 40 calls booked in the next 7 days with clients. So I love doing this consulting. We provide that free of charge. And then there's the last story that I want to tell you is about a guy by the name of Art Hamill. I don't know if you guys know Art Hamill or heard of Art Hamill. Arthur Hamill was the most prolific and successful business buyer in the history of the United States. On the small business level, more successful than Warren Buffett, because Warren Buffett doesn't buy small businesses. Art has just, Art passed away a few years ago. but he was the most prolific business buyer. And one day I got an email as follows. Not, this, of course, obviously before he passed, which was a number of years ago. Hi, Richard. I've bought over 200 businesses in my career. I've done hundreds of seminars for buyers, and I also wrote a guide on the product, sold a ton of them. I purchased your guide because there's always something to learn about business buying. Your information is incredible. My team has replaced our due diligence process with your 200-point checklist. Your seller questions have at least 20 great ones I never even thought of asking. I could go on, but suffice to say your whole program is fantastic. Well done, Richard. Anybody who wants to buy a business would be foolish not to follow your guidance. Let's have a call sometime and talk about business. You can reach me anytime at 949-363. I'm not going to give you the last 4 digits. P.S. You should raise the price. Art. So my point being is, you know what? If it's good enough for Art Hamill, good enough for you. I mean, this is the most, him and I struck up a really nice friendship, and he was a really old school, wonderful guy. And, but it shows you, he came from nothing also, but over 200 businesses. So once you get into this, it's really addictive. I bought 14 of them. The second one is easier than the first, and the 8th one is easier than the 7th. But I learned something in every deal. If we can, before we skip to the Q&A, just to let you know, go to richardparker.com. We have tons of articles. Every podcast that I've been on, I try to post all of them. I've been on 71 of them in the last 3 months alone. We all have them all there. There's lots of free articles. The course is there. The course has 23 modules, free consulting with me. Anytime you need it, we can jump on a call or answer your emails. And you know what? I can prove you I don't need the money, because it's really not important. We give a lifetime guarantee, and we sell the whole program for $197. So I hope you will join it. A case study, legal agreement, sample clauses, study guides, pro forma forecasting, the whole due diligence business assessment module for valuations, which is by far the industry standard, is one we developed. That's included in the model. So, I mean, this will be the smartest $200 you've ever spent next to buying a good business. So enough. I said I'm not going to give you sales tips. That was too much already. So let's go down to the Q&A. And I look forward to you joining us. Go ahead, Sia. Let's open it up for the Q&A. You get to see everybody's good-looking face, because everybody must be tired of looking at me.
Okay.
Oh, that's a nice suit. Who is that? Who's that right on the main screen that I see here? Oh, Jamia. Okay, nice suit. Okay, let her rip, Sia. Do I have to unmute everybody, or you can do it?
Let me see if I can unmute everyone. There are no questions that I have outright written. So it looks like Todd first.
You want to try Joe?
Why don't we go ahead and we'll go with Joe, and then we'll get you back,
Joe.
Todd.
Okay, now I like this, Joe. Now I get to see what an email looks like. Hey, how you doing?
Good to see your face. Yeah, Richard and I spoke last week for the first time. So thank you again for an engaging session. Super helpful, kind of just framing the entire landscape. The question I had, it's still fairly generic, is when you're thinking about combining or gaining your, what I would call your deal team or your advisors around you, right? You talked about the relationship with the brokers, the accounting team, and then also the legal team. I'm curious when it comes to deal structure, cap table considerations, and even corporate structure, who, obviously besides yourself as the buyer, who would you think about leaning most on to that, whether it's kind of an attorney that has done a lot of transactions like this, or it's more on the accounting side? Just some of those things that are not directly fall within the accounting or legal realms.
Okay. Well, first of all, great seeing you. I know we had a call last week, and it was wonderful, and I appreciate the update that you sent me on the deal. So I'm waiting for your next update. It's a great question. Think about this like it's almost like a Venn diagram, right? Because there's going to be a lot of overlap between your accountant and attorney in the areas that you made that you specified exactly. I will tell you, carve out the broker. The broker plays no role in any of this. Zero.
Right.
We talked about the 3 things. So your attorney and your accountant, good attorneys and good accountants won't tell you that they're good at doing something that they're not their area of specialty. The entity setup, typically, if you're doing an LLC as an example, the entity setup, the operating agreement, the setup itself, attorney. But your accountant needs to weigh in as to whether or not that's the right structure for you. especially if you have partners. As far as the, cap table attorney, by and large, and anything a structure related to lenders, typically attorney. However, if there's anything you're unsure of or the way it's structured, it's always good to go back to your accountant and bring them in. There is nothing wrong, and it's highly encouraged for those two to work hand in hand in many, many of these issues. The accountant is primarily responsible, can think about this, financial, and the attorney primarily is responsible stuff that's going to get drafted. So those are agreements, non-compete agreements, promissory notes. But then there are these cases that you brought up, which I'm glad is a great question. There is going to be some overlap. So typically, if you're not sure, ask one of them first. But the ones that you talked about as far as structure, if it's documents like setting up the LLC, whatever, because it falls under typically documents, it is going to be the attorney. The most important thing is understand they won't do the work that they're not capable of doing, but be sure you carve out the broker. They play no role, zero. Okay, and I think there was one other point you made related to entity. You talked about cap stack, you talked about entity, and you mentioned a third thing, and I apologize. Or did I cover it?
I was corporate structure that hit it. Yeah, no, it makes sense. I think your answer maybe summarized where it differs on the legal perspectives, but then there could be a situation where you're quarterbacking, but then having the legal firm work with your accountant, just kind of bouncing ideas in the same realm.
Correct. And when you have the right team, they really do work together well. I mean, and that's what nice very often where if you have an attorney, ask them for an accountant referral or vice versa. They've got to be working as a team, and there should never be headbutting. I mean, because this is your team, right? You don't want to have any headbutting. So if you even sense some of that, you've got to get them in line. It usually won't happen, but you want to make sure everybody it's your team. You're quarterbacking, but it's your team.
All right. Thanks, Richard.
Yeah, of course. And don't forget to send me the updated email. I'm looking forward to getting it.
Will do.
Okay, man.
Awesome.
Okay.
Let's get back with Todd.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? I can hear you perfectly.
All right. Perfect. Hi, Richard. Hey, you touched on this during the call, but I kind of want to go a little bit more into it. You talked about like the business purchase agreement, LOI, and so just ran into a situation where we're going to submit our own LOI, and the business broker said, "No, we will not accept it," or actually, the seller will not accept it. They will just reject it. You'll have to sign ours because they would have to go to their attorney and look at your LOI. He said, this business purchase agreement is non-binding. Do you agree with that? Or it was a lot more lengthy than like the LOI that we were going to submit.
Well, the first thing is that I'm going to answer your second question first. An LOI from a buyer's perspective, in some cases, you want parts of it to be binding. You want the price to be binding if they sign it. You want a no shop agreement in there so that they don't take your LOI and keep the business on the market. You want that to be binding. Yes, people have this idea that an LOI is non-binding, and to a large extent, it's not, but there's certain parts of it that you want them to be bound to. Now, I get what they are saying as far as the agreement is concerned. I'm less concerned about the LOI than I am about the definitive purchase agreement. Because brokers have asset purchase agreements, definitive purchase agreement, whatever you call it. You definitely don't want to use those. Or sometimes you can use, when I say definitely, you can't use those as is because you have to add in your own contingencies. So what I would suggest for the LOI, and especially because you want to get the ball rolling and you don't want to send the signal that you're hard ass or that you're not going to comply or whatever, read through the LOI. And if you want, you can send it to me. I'm happy to give it a first view so we can point out some of the key things so you can save some money on your attorney. Instead of asking him or her 12 things, you could ask him 3. So I'm happy to review it. But I wouldn't be concerned. I wouldn't worry about using their LOI as long as it meets the criteria. You're going to have to add some contingencies potentially. But I think you want to send the right message also, and especially because it is early on and it's not the big agreement. So maybe let's look at it together, and I'll give you, if I change my mind about it at all, I will let you know that. But based upon what you're saying, I don't have a fundamental problem with it because I'd be more concerned with keeping the deal going at this stage because it's the LOI, you could drive a truck through it.
Okay. All right. Thanks. I have another question, if that's all right.
Same price, go ahead.
All right. So we have our pre-qualification letter from an SBA lender. And I've been looking at like conventional loans because it seems like they're less expensive in some cases. I've seen like, ranges from like 7.5 for conventional versus like SBA could be like 11 and 4, 11 and a half.
It was 11, yep.
Yeah. And so is there a reason why I shouldn't first attempt to get a conventional loan? And are they more difficult?
How many businesses have you bought?
None.
Chances are you're not going to get a conventional loan unless you put 100% collateral up. That's the reality.
Okay.
Okay, and so the reason why it's a higher rate is because it's a higher risk factor. After you buy a couple of businesses, now you know, when I first started out in the first bunch of business, I couldn't get a loan either. Now I can go get a conventional loan. It's not just because I'm so good looking. It's because I've done this before and there's a track record, right? So that's the way they look at it. But commercial loans, traditional commercial loans are just not available because too much risk. Now, with that said, there are some SBA loans and condition criteria where you have to put up personal security up to 100% of the loan. So if you're going to have to secure it to that extent, you should investigate commercial loan because anybody will lend you money if they have no risk. And so, understand the criteria, but the fundamental reason between the two is commercial loans, people don't get loans for small business acquisitions, number one. And number two, there's far less risk in the eyes of a commercial lender who's lending to someone who meets all these guidelines and with a track record or what have you, than the SBA, even though it's a small failure rate, they really, that increased rate really is the buffer because the SBA guarantees a percentage of the loan to the lender.
Okay. And kind of tied to that, I'm just kind of wondering if I should get a HELOC loan to help supplement like my cash available to get to that 10% down. Is that a good thing, bad thing? Do you have to get that way in advance so they don't say, oh, well, you just went and got this to, kind of tie up that amount in your home or
Get a HELOC yesterday, and there's a couple of reasons why you want to do it. You may have access to the cash, number one, even though they say, well, you have that cash, but that sort of lowers your net worth potentially, when they do the two sides of the financial statement. But the other part why you want to get it is because if you have more than 25% equity in your home, they are required, they don't always, but they are required to go after your home as collateral. And if the HELOC ties it up, what I suggest is you go get a HELOC, you borrow all the money, don't spend it, don't get crazy. Don't go to Las Vegas now, Todd, and put it on 35 black. I'm going to get very angry over here. So, but you have the money accessible and it may offer you an element of protection from other collateral that you would normally have to provide. So yes, because if you take out the HELOC and you have the money available, it shows in your bank account, so it's part of your financial statement. If you have to retire the HELOC, you could write a check tomorrow. If one of the lenders said, "Well, you can't have the HELOC," so you write, that. So it's available. Just don't spend it. But yes, get it tomorrow.
Okay, great, thank you.
My pleasure. Nice to see you.
Just to piggyback off.
I always love these because I get to put faces to email, and very often, what I should start doing is I think when people order the material, I should force them to upload a picture because Joe, you look nothing like I had anticipated. Okay, and that's a good thing. Okay, so it's great. I love doing.
Was it the Buffalo Western New York accent or what?
What's that?
Was it the Western New York or Buffalo accent or what?
Yeah, well, we know we're both Bills fans, right? So.
To piggyback, actually, if I could, off of Todd's question, right? Because so Todd, I got two pre-quals, one at a fixed 7%, and then one at the variable 11.5%. Obviously, a huge difference there. And then Richard, I'm not asking you to predict the Fed here, but what kind of consideration would you go into, or how common are you seeing fixed SBA 7A loans versus variable? Just because obviously, short-term 7 locked in is better, but it's hard to imagine the 11 going up much more.
It is hard to imagine. I also lived through 18%. That's just because I'm old. So here's my take on things. There's a lot of unknowns when you're buying a business. We do all this education. You go through the due diligence, do all these things to mitigate the unknown, right? I mean, that's part of it. I never borrow money, acquisition loan at variable rate if I can avoid it. And the reason is follows: as long as I know the business can afford it, then I don't have to worry about it anymore. But if the business declines, like in a perfect storm, the business declines, rates go up. Now you're really in trouble. And so I don't want to worry about that stuff. If the rates decline and the business is doing well, I may recapitalize my loan. And at that point, it's 2 years down the road, because when you think about the exercise, how much money would you get a loan amortized over 10 years? The difference between, what was it? The difference between the loans when you're at 6%, I think I'm pretty close, but pardon me if I make a mistake here, but it's pretty darn close. 6% SBA loan versus 11% SBA amortized over 10 years. I think the difference with one service was $120,000 for every $1 million. The other one was at the higher rate was $160,000 for every million. So it's $40,000 a year. You know what? If you're getting $1 million loan, we're assuming the business is making around $250,000 to $350,000 a year. $40,000 is no big deal. But if it goes up dramatically and you have a variable loan, or the business drops and you have a variable loan that goes up, that can cause a lot of problems. So I look at this, it's just my personal preference. I want to forget about it. Run the business for 2-3 years. It's successful. If the loans drop, they're not going back to 2%. I'm not an economist, okay, but I'm pretty close and willing to bet it's not going back to 2% or zero anytime soon. And so you run the business for a few years and you're successful, you can go to a bank, you have a track record, you may be able to borrow part or all of it to retire it. You may be able to borrow, if you have a $5 million loan, you borrow $2 million, or you can put a prepayment on the SBA loan, then you have the other loan, so you have some options. I want to, from my personal perspective, and everybody's different, I want to be able to run the business and not pay attention anything whatsoever to that part of it, because that just causes like agita, it's just heartburn. And so I would take the one where I know what I'm dealing with, and I don't want to focus on that. That's my personal preference, and I'd like to see people do the same thing, because I think it provides a high degree of comfort, and you're good to go.
Excellent. So we have a question from Mike Powell. Unfortunately, he is putting his kids to bed, so he asked me to read this off
Well,
for
that's
you.
not unfortunate. It's very fortunate.
Well, he wanted to ask directly, but
okay, okay, go ahead. Hey, Mike.
It said he asks, if doing an asset purchase, would you use a title company to close if there are no title changing assets in play, no real estate or vehicles?
No, and you know what? My wife is a title agent, and I love her dearly. But unless she was doing businesses, unless this is a deal that is an e-commerce company where there are title and escrow companies that specialize specifically in the closing of e-commerce businesses, because of the transition of the URL has to happen in a certain way, and they specialize in that, no, use an attorney. Because a title agent who does real estate knows about as much about business as a dentist knows about doing title. It's use an attorney. No, not this. Don't make that mistake. No matter how simple it is, it's never that simple.
Excellent. I don't have any other questions. Does anybody want to raise their hand?
So either one of two things. Either I put everybody to sleep, or there's so much information, they don't know what hit them. Okay. So anyways,
we got two more.
Okay, go ahead.
It looks like Patrick. Patrick Welch.
Sorry. Yeah.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
We can hear you beautifully. Do you have a camera, Patrick?
Yeah, let me see if I got it.
Come on, put on your camera. That's part of the deal. That's why we charge the big bucks for these webinars. There you go. How you doing?
Hey, good. How are you? So my question is in regards to trying to buy a business when you have an existing W-2 job. Trying to find the time to do something like this it can be a little challenging. I also have 2 kids. So, would you say, just try and find the time, nights, evenings, or like in between your job, or, you got to potentially take time away from your job and focus on buying the business itself. So I kind of wanted to hear your perspective on that, if you've worked with any clients who were in my position as well.
Yeah, so I've worked with a few, probably only about 25,000 of them are in the exact same position. So that's a good thing. And by the way, thanks to all, no, Jeffrey, Dan, etc. Thanks. I guess some of them are jumping off, but thank you for joining us today. It's great, and I appreciate your feedback. So, Patrick, this is very common, your scenario. Over the years, based on, we told you earlier about like lots of data that we tried to accumulate. Here's some of the realistic numbers relating to getting this done properly. You really have to devote 15 to 20 hours a week to doing this. So that's really what the number is. And I would never, ever, ever suggest that you leave your job or take a leave of absence to do this at the early stages. It may become overwhelming at some point, and you may have to do it, or you start to realize, hey, you know, if you looked at a bunch of businesses, had some deals fall apart, but hey, I can do this. I realize now that, you know, I'm acquiring the knowledge. I got my team together. This is going to be a 3-4 month process. I'm ready to roll. You can make that the decision at that point. If you're early on, you don't want to make that now. At the beginning, you just have to like, you got to like rub some dirt on it. You know what I mean? You just got to, you got to push through. And typically it's 15 to 20 hours a week. The one thing that you don't want to do is, you know, your time at work is your time at work. Someone signing your paycheck, you got to do it in off hours. Congratulations, your little kids and your family always comes first. What I would suggest at the beginning, go with this, figure out a way that you can devote without question 5-7 hours a week to this consistently, and put it into your schedule, whether it's Monday night and Tuesday night, or you get up at 5 o'clock and say, well, even if your kids are young enough, you're getting up 5 o'clock in the morning anyways on Saturday, but schedule it in and go about this. So yes, you know, I teaching and preaching how to do this in 6 months. Well, who cares if it takes you a year or 18? As long as you're doing it, you just don't want to get scattered, and you don't want to get away from the routine. The most important thing for people that are W-2s and have other obligation is you have to make this part of your schedule. And you have to be as focused as you can. Where you're going to have some difficulty, for example, is potentially meeting with sellers. You can't do it during the week. You know, in the middle of the week, you just can't do it. And so you have to schedule potentially meetings at night or by Zoom or early in the morning. You work around it, you pivot. That's just the way it goes. But it's 100% doable. It just may take you a little longer. And you're nowhere near the point that you want to throw in the towel on your W-2, because it could take you a year. I mean, typically our number is six months, but it could take 8 or 12. And if not, that starts eating into your savings. And for whatever reason, if you decide, you know, one of the things that I always try to convince people of is you may not buy a business, but if you have any part of you that's interested in entrepreneurship, you owe it to yourself to at least go through the process and learn about it. And then you can decide whether or not you want to do it. So I would suggest, you know, figure out a way to carve out 5 to 7 hours a week at the beginning, increase that over time, and do this in the most methodical way. The thing that you have to do that's critically important is you've got to set aside specific time to do this. Because if not, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks going to go by and you get nothing accomplished, then you can't cram it in and, you know, into a leave of absence. So that's the way I'd recommend you do it. And people do this all the time. Yes, the 20 hours is the magic number, but your scenario is far more common than people that are doing this full time. No question.
Great advice. Thanks for that. I don't want to be part of that 90% that you spoke of, and just trying to weed out some of the bad content which you talked about, the misinformation on the internet. So I'm glad you're putting out this this content and this educational materials for all of us. I think there's value in it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks. And, you know, come across anything, you know, get in touch with me and we'll always work through it. Perfect. Okay,
Excellent.
Jamila.
Hey, how you doing, Richard?
Jamila, I thought you were wearing that nice white suit. What happened?
I changed like Superman real quick, man.
You still look terrific. Never mind. You look good, man. Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you too. I apologize. I lost my voice yesterday teaching on the webinar, so sorry if I'm a little scratchy voice wise. But Patrick I kind of want to piggyback off of Patrick's question. He kind of asked in a different way, kind of my scenario. So my goal is from getting your materials, studying your materials. My goal is within 6 months to purchase a cash flowing business that can at least pay me at least $10,000 a month salary, but also at a minimum of about $400,000 of EBITDA. So that way I know they at least got a management system and a team in place, so I won't have to actually go in and I won't actually be buying a job. Kind of want to manage. And my goal is to commit 15 to 20 hours a week in doing so. And I guess my question was, is that realistic? But you somewhat kind of answered. I know it's not a magic time. It's not a magic number. Every business is different. But I'm really committed to really buying, scaling, and selling businesses, but also buying cash flow as well, adding to my wealth as well while doing so, and just managing companies up under, making my main LLC consulting company a holding company, and buying, selling holding companies, eventually doing roll-ups, but making it really what I do full time in business acquisitions and consulting world. And with that 6-month goals, if I'm following your materials to the T, of course, calling you, getting advice. Of course, it's going to be some stumble, but being really dedicated. Is that realistic with those numbers that I gave?
Okay, so there's two parts to this. One question that you brought up, or a comment you made up, that I think is actually more important than the first one. But yes, it's realistic. The 6 months is certainly realistic. The cash flow related to putting in management place, yes, of course, that's realistic. But the piece that I take from your question, which is more important than anything else, is understanding your plans, hopes, dreams, and what you've laid out as a blueprint is phenomenal. But there's one part of this that you got to get right more than anything else, which is the time between that $100,000 and the other acquisitions. You have got to get into the business and run the business. You cannot run a business absentee. You can run a business absentee after you know the business better than anybody on the planet. Absentee run businesses are absentee run profits. Okay? You buy a business, and I see this all the time, and people come to me, they got tons of money relative to other people who don't have, and they say, well, I'm going to put down $500,000. I'm buying this business. I'm going to get with financing. I'm going to bring a manager into place. And other scales, people say I have $25,000 and I'm going to go buy a laundromat and I'm going to let someone, well, you know what? And I'm going to let people run the business. Well, what happens if they quit? What happens if they don't do the job right? What happens if they're the wrong people? You have got to learn that business. You've got to run it. The plan is brilliant. Okay, so I've made my whole life that way. I mean, I had 14 companies. It was my first company, became the basis for everything else. I screwed up plenty along the way, not a couple, more than a couple along the way. But you've got to get in and immerse yourself in the business. You learn the business, and then you can determine who I need to hire, what needs to be put in place, how quickly can I exit? Can I hire the right person tomorrow and start reducing my workload immediately? Do I have to go from 60 hours a week to 40 and 40 to 20? But the whole point being is you've got to get the guts of your business in your belly first, and you got to immerse yourself. If the plan makes sense, keep that in mind, because I promise you, anything, the BS that you see online of buying absentee run business, it's hogwash. And 15, 20 hours a week is going to do the job. It's absolutely going to do the job as long as you're heading in the right direction. 15, 20 hours a week and you're going like this doesn't get you over there. You want to be like boom, like a laser beam. So that's, yes, absolutely 100% doable.
And that makes perfect sense. It's almost with anything, you can't teach what you don't know, and you can't troubleshoot or fix what you don't know. So actually buying the business, having over time, I develop a process like, hey, I'm gonna take the next 90 days or 6 months to really know this business, and then I can build a team behind it. That makes perfect sense and clarity. So I'm excited working with you, Richard. Thank you for being out there.
Our pleasure. One of the things, Jamia brought up a good thing. And next time, Jamia, I'm expecting the white suit because you look like a movie star in that thing. The next time, the one thing that we talk about is, for most of you who follow the material, the last lesson is post-purchase priorities and things that you need to do for the next 90 days. One of the things is you don't do nothing. You learn the business. You know nothing. You go in there, listen, learn, and put some things into place or think about things in place. But they're the immersion process of change, because you really don't know the business well enough in most cases to make any changes. So that immersion process is really, really, really important, the transition process. So understanding that business till you're at the point that you can, most business owners do their marketing on gut. That's the reality, because they've been doing it for a long time. They know what works. They know who the customers are. They really often work without a plan, but they have the guts of the business in their belly. So, with the point Jimmy brought up is really, really important, and everyone pay attention to that absentee concept, because first you got to learn before you can earn.
Richard,
Awesome.
Oh, Irene.
hi.
Irene.
Sorry, I'm losing my voice too, but that immersion process that you kind of mentioned now, the 6 months, is that based on a period of transition with the former seller staying on to do that, or part of it?
Great question. The business dictates. You want to sign, the complexity related to the business will dictate how long you want them to be there. In my experience, in the most simple of businesses, you need them there for a month. And I'm talking like the simplest of businesses. I mean, because day one, and Deb Curtis, who's not on this call, always laughs and saying, like, on the first day, you don't even know how to turn off the alarm. So you need them there for at least 30 days. The way I like to structure deals is follows. Let's assume that I determine, it's going to take me 2 months, I think, to start to get a little comfortable with this. And I'm just using that as an example. I always want to bind the seller for 6. So I'm going to say, I want to have 2 months of free training, and I'm going to pay you. I want you to be available on a full-time basis for up to 6 months, and I can get out of it at any time. The goal is get in there, learn it as fast as you can, and get them out, because they can't add a lot of people, or the employees are going to be asking them questions. They don't know who the real boss is, but you need to make sure when you look at it, how much is a reasonable amount of time for me to learn this business, and don't overestimate your skills. At the same time, if you need them too long, you probably shouldn't buy the business. But a good barometer is, the more the business that's reasonably complex, not over the top. I mean, you yourself, it's going to take 6 months, and you're going to need them there for a period of time. Sometimes it could be dissipating. Hey, I need you here full time for a month. In month 2, I'm probably going to need you for 70% at a time. Month 3, 50, etc. But you have to tie them up to make sure they're available. Now, it comes up in situations, and we're going to see more and more of it, where people are retiring, and they say, "Oh, no, as soon as I sell this business, I'm leaving." And so you have to make accommodation for that. And you may have to bring in a consultant or an industry consultant. And so that the seller has to take a haircut on the price. So there's a lot of things to consider. But as a good barometer, keep in mind, it's going to take you always ask good questions, so I know you're smart. So my guess is, but it's going to take you 6 months to learn any business. And so the transition of how effective or how important a seller is to that business will dictate how long you need them to stay. And don't let yourself get bullied into a situation where you don't have them there long enough, because you could really get yourself into trouble. You may need that crutch or security blanket for whatever reason. And it could be for introductions to vendors or customers, or continuity in the eyes of the customers, or just your own, your own comfort level. So make sure you're very, very comfortable with it. And, if you get into any particular businesses, as you look at them, I always find it very helpful to bounce it off someone. And I'm always happy to jump onto a call, go through and say, like, you really dig into what the seller does every day, because you want to make sure you're comfortable with that. So you give yourself the most amount of time for a proper transition. If the seller is apprehensive about that, you got to be considerate.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, of course.
All right. So we're at the top of the hour. We have one question from Elon. Unfortunately, I have bad connection, so they requested that I read this to you. And we are at the top of the hour. Hint, hint.
Oh, that's fine. That's Elon. You said ELON, like Elon Musk?
I think it's ILLAN. I'm going to go with Elon.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for the
Okay.
webinar today. How much of a finance background do you need to analyze a potential business and challenge data provided by the CIM, especially to filter opportunities and before sending an LOI?
I'm sorry that I'm laughing. I mean, I couldn't even read a first financial statement when I bought my first business. Like, no clue. I didn't even know what a balance sheet was compared to an income statement. Not necessarily a good thing, but this is numbers. This is math. You can learn that. Okay. Where people go off the reservation because you get some of these fancy MBAs and they're sending me pivot tables or whatever. The financials are the easiest part of the business because it's math. I'll do it in layman's terms. They is or they ain't. So it equals 1 + 1 always equals 1. It never equals 3. With that said, okay, at the be what I would advise some to do if you have absolutely no experience related to financials whatsoever, 2 things. Number 1, go into Coursera, Coursera, and take a course in business financial statements. You won't learn them all. It'll give you a bit of an understanding. That's number 1. Number 2, at the beginning, when you look at financial statements, especially if you don't have an experience, you want to try to get the financial statements to lay out at least 3 years, line by line, so you can at least identify where there's discrepancies, if marketing costs gone up or gone down, or margins have changed. The third point is, if you really have no acumen whatsoever, well, then it's well worth your money to have a CPA walk them through with you at the beginning. But I promise you, you can learn them. If you have to take a step back and take a bit of a course, don't do what I did. I was flying by the seat of my pants. It just doesn't make sense because there's a lot of good information out there. But the basics of understanding financial statement, we have a section of the course called Basic Accounting. Jessica Collin, who is usually on these calls, she's the CEO in residence at Regenerative Capital Group. I gave them like a 45-minute lesson. I promise you, Elon, if you go through that lesson itself, you're partially off to the races. You'll get it because there's standardization. They follow a similar flow. Marvin, who's on the call now, will tell me they're very comprehensive, but it's math, Marvin, right? Like, if you give me the thumbs up, and we can teach anybody, right? I mean, they can be learned, and in collaboration with someone who does it for a living, it's very doable. But with all that, you still want to learn how to do it. Even if you hire the best accounting firm in the world to interpret them for you and review them, you still want to do it on your own, because if you're going to buy a business, you need to know how to read financial statements. So it's in stages. The first thing is read the course section on accounting for a business purchase, because it'll really open up your eyes. Consider taking the Coursera course. That's very important. Then start to look at a couple of different statements and see the standardization and how they look, and trying to find, I always say, like, disturbances in the water. What doesn't look right year to year, line item by line item. And worst case scenario, you ask your accountant, you work with a junior for a little while, then you start working on the first 3-4 statements together, and then you'll get it. I promise you, it's math. It's not that it's not that difficult. It is math. You don't need to over-engineer this piece of the process for what you need to do as far as interpreting and doing an initial basic valuation. So I hope, Elon, that answered your question. If there's anything that you're unclear about, and especially after you go through the course section on that, it'll really open your eyes. But please, just email me, and I'm happy to take you through it as well. From Joel Valdez, incredible value. Thank you so much, Richard, for taking the time. My pleasure, Joel. Nice to too bad I didn't see you. I know we spoke a couple of weeks ago, so that was great.
So
Okay,
I'd like to share something here. If you want to share your parting words, sir.
Yep. Okay, so we talked about the closing. Go online, get the list of brokers in your area, set up the meetings with brokers and prominence who have prominence in the categories that we talked about. Get your financing resources in place. We've covered that extensively. And also read the course resources of the LOI, the purchase agreement, and NDA. Get familiar with them so you have a good understanding. We're going to have a community Q&A sessions probably next week. That was community. Anyone who's following the course, well, you'll get an email, and you can join us for a full-blown Q&A. Please keep sending me your questions. All you how to buy a good business at great price clients, send me your questions. We need to get on the phone. You'll let me know. And one thing is, I'm not that slick at this, so that's especially why CS here besides her. She's not just a pretty face. She's very good at what she does, but I'm not slick at this stuff. So if you have any suggestions about how we can improve these webinars, please let me know. I have skin as thick as a Buick. I don't need to know the good stuff. I need to know the bad stuff. Anything we can do to make it better, please let me know. The next topic for the next session is going to be due diligence. That's probably going to be 2 or 3 webinars, because the course section on that, I think it's like 70 pages. So we can't, as fast as I talk, and I apologize for that, it's going to take us a few lessons, a few sessions to do that. So thank you. I appreciate everybody's time. I know it's the evening, And I really appreciate everybody joining us. So thank you again for everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody have a wonderful night.
Thank
We'll
you,
see you
sir.
soon.
Thank you. You as well.